see you guys in the dark.
This is something that happened to me 5 or so years ago. I was fresh out of university with my degree in international development. I wanted to help undeserved communities, develop meaningful projects, and see more of the world. I was young, I was naive, eager to get started. I took one of my first jobs that offered me a position. It wasn't something I necessarily wanted to do, but it was adjacent to my interests, and more important, took me to a place that I'd never been before. I loved everything when I arrived. It was beautiful, sunny, and green. My new coworkers, all local staff, were amazing and so kind. My boss invited me to play soccer on Sundays with his family. My fellow project coordinator would go out dancing with me on the weekends. My roommate, a fellow expat working in development as well, was a fun and spunky woman that I adored. I felt so blessed. Then one day, it changed. I was walking downtown with a friend. There was a vegetable and fruit market that had great, fresh produce directly from the farmers growing it. It was about a 20-minute bus ride from my apartment. So not close, but not incredibly far either. My friend and I loaded up and began walking over to a quiet corner to call a cab to help us haul our goods back. Then I heard it. Hey, miss. Then I heard my exact address. It took me a second to realize that he was shouting my address. I turned around to see a man hanging out of his car, slowly crawling along the road with us. My friend recognized my address too. She turned to me and asked, "Do you know him?" "I've never seen him before." He just kept on shouting, "Hey you, you're living in the back house on the second floor, right?" That made it even worse. I lived on a big suburban lot with 2 houses, one in the front where my landlady and her family lived, and the second in the back house. The second house was split into 2 apartments. The bottom floor housed 2 students, while I lived on the second floor with my roommate. You couldn't see the second house from the road, much less the stairway that led to the second floor. My heart was pounding. I wanted to shout back at the guy, but I was scared. I was a 22-year-old woman living in a foreign country, and I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't know how people would react. I didn't know how he would react, so we walked. My friend tried to comfort me, saying that maybe he knew my landlady's family. I was probably the only redhead in the whole country. He would be a neighbor I hadn't met. The encounter didn't leave me. It stayed in my mind. A week or so had passed. I stopped glancing behind my back whenever a car would drive by. I started to feel secure. Then he showed up again. I was walking home from work. It was getting dark. My office was a 15 to 20-minute stroll from my apartment. Perfect as a quick way to stretch my legs. I was halfway home when I felt someone watching me. Then, the slow crawl of a car idling up beside me. I knew that it was him without even looking. "Miss," and then my address again, he said, leaning out of his window, one hand on the wheel. "Why, are you shy?" I ignored him and kept on walking. There was no one around. It was getting dark. "Come on," he said. "Let me give you a ride. I know where you live." Not reassuring. I started to feel my chest tighten. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know what he'd do if I reached for my phone. I was practically jogging now, but he just sped up to match my pace. "Listen, bitch." Now he was angry. His voice was hard. "You don't just ignore a man like that." I wondered what I'd do if he stopped the car. He looked fit, young. He could probably catch me. He could hurt me. So I did something that, in retrospect, seemed absolutely bizarre. I yelled at him, wildly, rapidly. I did it in my first language, not that they spoke this in this country. Not a language that he would ever have heard, probably. I screamed curse words and threats, anything that I could think of. I'll never forget the confused fury on his face, but he did slow down, letting me run ahead. I could see a woman at a bus stop at the intersection ahead. If I got to her, maybe she could help me. Maybe he'd get scared off. By the time that I got to the woman, he was gone. I kept walking home, looking behind me with every step. I told my roommate about what had happened. She told me not to bother reporting it to the police, since they were corrupt and wouldn't do anything. When I told my boss, he told me the same. He said he had a baseball bat and would come whenever I called. I saw the man again 2 weeks later. He was sitting in his car, parked in front of the gates to my apartment. I was about to take out the trash, but retreated before he could see me. I told my landlady, and when she went over to confront him, he drove off. This continued for weeks, not every day, but once or twice a week. He was already there, waiting. I took cabs to and from work. I never traveled alone. I barely slept, waiting for him to break in and kill me. The last weekend abroad, he almost did. I went out drinking with a group of my friends, 4 of us in total. We were celebrating the end of my contract, and I was happy to go home in a few days. I couldn't wait to see my family. I couldn't wait to put an ocean between me and that man. We had beers at a local bar, a 5 to 10 minute walk max from my apartment. When it started to get late, probably around 1 o'clock, we tried to get a cab, but it was impossible. The roads were jammed, and people were everywhere outside. Cabs couldn't even get to us. Or so we thought. Even though others warned us not to. Let's walk home. It would be faster than calling a cab. We'll be fine. We're a group of 4. No one will hassle us. We got halfway there when we had to cross a main road. There were no street lights. Not that kind of place. The road was absolutely empty. Not a single car was in sight. We crossed the road. A few more minutes, but then we were backlit with a bright headlight of a car coming up. We glanced back. It was a cop car. 2 men in the front, and I knew, even though I couldn't see from the bright lights in my eyes, he was driving. He was a fucking cop. The Jeep slowed, as I knew it would. He rolled down the window to drawl. "Hey, miss," and then my address again. "Nice night, yeah?" My friends immediately knew who he was. I could see how nervous they were. We were alone on a dark, empty street in the middle of the night. They were cops. So they were armed. No one would intervene, probably. It would be too dangerous. "You girls need a ride?" he leered. His friend, who I could now see, was grinning hugely. My last few days, I thought, and this is how it would end. We sped up our pace. I don't know what our plan was, other than to get away. When I heard one of the doors of the Jeep open as the passenger jumped out, I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life, although I didn't dare turn back to see. We were at the turn to my street. 2 minutes more to get to safety. The car was right behind us. Whoever had gotten out of the car was right behind us. 2 of my friends were ahead now, while another clutched my hand and dragged me along. Then, out of nowhere, another car appeared. They were coming from the opposite direction. When they slowed to see what was going on, I've never been so grateful. It was an older couple, and they looked concerned. I think they knew something bad was about to happen. I heard, not saw, the car door swing open. I almost got hit as they sped past us in a hurry. The other car had stayed, watching. They offered to escort us home, driving alongside just in case. But I knew he wouldn't come back. Not tonight, at least. I still took a cab with my friends to their place for the night. We took my roommate with us, just in case. Nothing happened after that. My last 2 days were uneventful, although I couldn't shake the feeling that he might show up at any given moment. Driving to the airport, all packed up and ready to go home, my cab got pulled over by a cop. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't him, although it could have been. It wasn't until I got on the plane, until I landed in my home country, that I finally felt that terror leave me. I still get nervous when cars drive up behind me, when men roll down their windows to shout at me. It's never him, but still, you never know. Let's not meet again, stranger who knows where I live. I'm currently a 17-year-old female who gets mistaken as a 21 to 24-year-old since I got into university early. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm used to being stalked. I guess since I have the face of a child, but the height of an adult that attracts creepers. I'm so used to it, I've actually had a system on how I can check if the stalker is dangerous or not. This story happened about 4 or 5 months ago. I was a student at a university in Marbella at the time that this incident had happened. I'm the kind of person who likes to get to class before everyone else, to set up pranks. One day, as I was walking to the university early in the morning, I was listening to music when I heard the sound of a car creeping behind me. There weren't any sidewalks, causing the students to walk on the side, if not in the middle of the road. Thinking that it was a car that wanted to go by, to go to work or something, I just moved aside. I pulled out my earplugs just as a safety measure, looked at the driver. The driver was almost leaning out of the window entirely, staring creepily at me. His eyes looked as if they were about to pop out. You know, the eyes of someone who does a whole lot of drugs. Being a little startled by this, I pretended to start walking as if nothing was wrong, occasionally glancing at him. I've seen him around before. He and some of his companions would go up to a lot of girls and try to talk to them, get them inside of their big black car. Some of the girls even caught the men trying to take pictures of them, even try anyone who would pass their small shack of a home where all 4 or 5 men lived. It kind of stinks of weed. Now that I come to think about it, I wonder why the police never did anything about them. I had finally reached the tunnel. This one that people had to cross to get to the university trail. A run-down road up a hill with nothing but farms around it. So convenient, right? Still hearing the car creep behind me, and getting slower as I got closer to the tunnel. I sprinted as soon as I reached the tunnel, out and onto the trail. I hadn't stopped running till I reached the university's main building. I had looked back and seen the car make a U-turn at the head of the trail and disappeared into the distance. Panting, I tried to open up the building's doors. Oh great, it was locked. I pulled out my phone quickly, asked a friend why it was locked at this time. Turns out it was a holiday today, meaning that I got up for no freaking reason. Why? After collecting myself, I walked down the trail stealthily. I glanced around everywhere. The car nor the man was in sight. I was relieved. I decided to walk through the tunnel at ease. Once I got back on the road, I heard that familiar car creeping behind me. Taking a quick glance behind my shoulder. Yep, you guessed it. It was the creeper guy. Still staring, still with half his body sticking out of the window. Thinking quickly, I remember that there was a small fence up ahead, and if one were to jump over it, it would land them right in a forest with lots of cover, that I know like the back of my hand. I jogged up to the fence, leaned against it, facing the road, and the car. I pulled up my phone, and I pretended that I was texting someone, while I was actually filming the guy's reactions. The man's car almost came to a halt, and I was ready. Oh, did I forget to mention that I'm a blue belt in Taekwondo too? Oops. He seemed as if he was about to open up his door, when another car came up right behind him. This car seemed to be perfectly normal. In fact, the driver wasn't too happy about my stalker's car driving so slowly. More and more cars began piling up behind Mr. Creeper, forcing him to move on down the road. I watched with a smirk as his face turned into a look of anger at me. The kind of face a baby would make. I've noticed a lot of stalkers make that face when they fail. I watched him watch me, until he looked away, having to see where he was driving off to. I waited until he turned the corner, knowing that he might make a U-turn yet again. I sprinted back to my apartment, double-checking if I was being watched before I went inside. I did see that guy on a couple of occasions. He and his buddies tried to talk to me, even tried to touch my arm as I walked by. I'll just let you imagine what I did. Now that I come to think of this as a lot creepier than I normally viewed it as. Just exactly what were they up to? I am now at a different university. That much is better, especially with security. It just so happens to be online. This happened to me one crisp, autumn morning while I was walking to my bus stop when I was a freshman in high school. I played the cello. I still do. And my school orchestra had signed up to play in a local school orchestra festival that day. So I was a bit dolled up with makeup, a nice twisted hairdo, a floor-length black dress, and a pair of shiny flat black suede shoes. I decided not to take my cello and use my school's cello instead to avoid the risk of damage and theft. Well, it turns out that my cello wasn't the only thing that I needed to worry about being damaged or stolen that day. I said goodbye to my family as I rushed out the door, binder in arm and backpack in tow. When I got past the edge of my lot, a white, unmarked delivery van without a license plate drove past me, slowed down for a moment, as if the driver was looking at something. Warily, I quickened my pace as I watched the van drive to the end of my cul-de-sac and turn around. I noticed that the van was hanging back a ways and going very slowly. I thought, okay, this is creepy, and walked even faster. Then the unthinkable happened. I tripped over my dress. My binder went flying out in front of me, spilling some of its contents. I heard the van speed up behind me as I scrambled to pick everything up with my bloody hands, and then run away. But it was too late. The van had caught up to me. The driver opened up his window. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride to school?" he said. He looked to be about 35 or 40 years old, had ear-length reddish-brown hair, brown eyes, and a skinny build. His eyes were bloodshot, and his movements were very fast, as if he was tweaking out on some sort of stimulant. "I'm fine," I said. "Just leave me alone." "Are you sure that you don't want a ride?" he called, as I walked away. "Yeah, I'm sure. Now stop bothering me before I call the police," I exclaimed as I tried to run away. Thankfully, my dad's friend was working in his front yard and came to my aid when he realized that I was in trouble. The creep tried to convince him that he was just trying to help me, but seeing how distressed I was, and the fact that he kept following me, put up his red flags, and he didn't buy it at all. My dad's friend told me to run inside, get washed up while he called the police. As I did so, the creep tried to get out of his van when my dad's friend slammed the door shut, saying that if you get out of the van and you try to hurt that girl, I will beat your sorry ass. You need to leave now. I told my dad's friend that I still wanted to catch the bus, thinking that being among friends would help me calm me down. He agreed to watch over me until the bus got there. There was one other girl at that stop, and that was some kind of comfort, but the creep had the nerve to come back. When he drove by the second time, I ran for the nearest ditch and started sobbing. I was scared for my life. I had previously been in a 6.8 meter earthquake, and this experience was 10 times scarier than that. The other girl at the top ran over to me, asking me what was wrong. I told her what had just happened. She stayed there with me until my dad's friend raced down there in his truck. We waited until the bus came to make sure that the other girl and the other students who came later got on the bus safely. Once I got to school, I told the campus police officer what happened, tearfully gave him the best description of the creep and his vehicle as I could. Thankfully, he was caught later that day while I was at school. I thanked the campus police officer profusely for getting that search started. Turns out the creep had been living in the neighborhood for about a year. He could have been watching me for that long, and I didn't even know it. This is an experience that I do not wish on my worst enemy. For months afterward, I was so afraid to walk by myself in my own neighborhood that my parents had to walk or drive me to my bus stop and wait with me, because going by myself meant having flashbacks and embarrassing panic attacks. This creep may not have taken me, but he took away my ability to feel safe. And it took me a long time to gain that back. To the creep who did this to me, why, you sick fuck? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.